Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with the second part of my big fat eyeshadow project for this month. This is a project that I've been doing all year where I go through my palettes and I kind of get to know them better. I rank them, I use them, I make free exclusive looks with them. And on top of that, I also have a beauty budget, which means that I'm coding my eyeshadow purchasing as well as doing Expand Those Pants, which was inspired by Dora. So I did decide to split this month up, like I said, in two parts. That is mainly because I have been working on 6 palettes in the month of November just to have a chance to get through all my palettes this year. So since I have so many looks and stuff to go through in this video, I thought it would be better to split them up just because otherwise the video would have been probably an hour long. So the video we done up 2 days ago was my part 1, which was my eyeshadow bank part of this video. Today I'm going to go through the palettes themselves and go through Expand Those Pants as well. I'm going to go through the ranking, the looks, everything like that. And like I said, I do have 6 palettes to go through, so it's going to be quite a few things. So I'm going to crack on. Quick little disclaimer first though, I know that I was supposed to do Vlogmas this year and I know that I've completely failed at it. I'm going to try to post every day moving forward from starting today. The reason was because I had internet issue. I did a post on my community tab. I don't know if you guys saw that, but that's why I haven't been posting. And yesterday's upload I just missed because I just didn't have a chance to film and edit and get it uploaded in time. I did get the internet started though, so now it is all set, so it should be fine moving forward. And as long as I have time to film everything, it should be fine with keeping up with Vlogmas. So yeah, I'm going to jump straight into the video, but before I do so, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. Let's jump into the video. So I'm going to crack on with the look straight away and the palettes just because I know that it's going to be a lot to talk about, and you're probably not new to this project. If you want to see how this is kind of set up, you can check out my previous videos in the series earlier this year. So the very first palette that we have to talk about is one of my Pathograph palettes. This was actually one of my product level up palette. It was a product level up palette for the month of November. So I'm currently working on this one and I will post my update for that very soon. But this is what the palette looks like. This is my Pathograph Midnight Sun palette. It's a beautiful kind of autumnal color story and I've been really excited to work on this one. It's been fun to reach for too. I was kindly gifted this one from one of my subscribers, Dora. She sent this over to me. I'm so grateful that I had so much fun playing with this palette, both obviously in this project but also in my product level up. So I'm going to jump into the 3 looks. So we're going to start off with look number 1, which is this one right here. I started off with the shade Extreme Dusk in my outer corner, which is the darkest shade in the palette. And then I blended that out with the shade Taboo right next to it in my crease, and I also put that on my lower lash line. I then went in with the shade Blitz Violet Envy all over the lid, which is like the purpley blue shade in this palette. And to top off my inner corner to make it a little bit brighter, I went in with the shade Astral Solstice, which is the last shade in the palette. And then for my inner corner, I used the first shade in the palette called Skin Show Moon Glow, and that was look number 1. Really happy with how this one turned out. Very, very stunning. Then for day 2, I did another kind of autumnal look. This one is definitely very different from the first one though. I started off with the shade Vermilion Venom, which is the more red tone matte in my outer corner, and blended into my crease as well as on my lower lash line. And then I went in with the shade Blood Moon 005 all over my lid, which is that coppery shimmery shade. I also wanted to use the shade Bronze Eclipse, so I put that on my center lower lash line. And then for my inner corner, I used the shade Astral Solstice. And I'm not sure if I said, but I used the Vermilion Venom on my lower lash line as well. I used to complete that look, and that was the second look with this palette. Then for day 3, I did the look right here. I started off with the shade Taboo in my crease, which is a more crease shade again in the palette. And then I went in with the shade Wicked Envy all over the lid and on my lower lash line, which is the green shade in the palette. For my inner lid topper, I used the shade Jubilee, which is the last shade on the top row, which is more of a kind of yellowy goldy shade. And for my inner corner, I used the shade Skin Show Moon Glow, which is again the first shade in the palette, and that was look number 3. So those were all of the looks with this palette. I'm not going to show you what it looks like right now because it is my product level up palette, like I said, and I want to save the progress for that video. And again, that will be up very soon, so you can stay tuned for that. But I'm going to go ahead and go through the ratings of this palette instead. So let's talk me through that. So if you're new to this project, briefly, I do 4 categories for ratings. I do color story, versatility, quality, and personal ranking. And you can score max 5 score in each category. So for color story, I gave this specific palette a 3. I said this palette has another beautiful Pathograph color story, leaning very autumnal this time. It's not my favorite color story from her, but I still really enjoy it. So 3 points. For versatility, I gave it a 4. I said this palette has a lot of different looks to give. The palette overall is very autumnal, but each of the 3 looks that I've made were very distinctive. On top of that, you can make smoky looks, you can make light looks, colorful looks, and neutral looks. So 4 for versatility. For quality, I also give it a 4. I said it is again the great Pat McGrath formula, not her best, but it's still very good. I can't give it a 5 as I know there is slightly better palettes out there, so 4 for that category. And lastly, for personal ranking, I gave it a 4. I said this is a new palette for me, gifted this year from one of my subscribers. I've used it here and in my product level up, and I have really liked it. It's been a perfect palette for this time of year, November especially, and I loved all 3 looks. So 4 there. And adding all of that up, that means that I scored in at 15 out of 20 points for this specific palette. The second palette that we have to talk about is a Natasha Denona palette, and that one is this one here, which is the Glam Face palette by, again, Natasha Denona. This is in the shade Light. So this one has 5 shades and 2 face products, and I didn't count the face products into this project, but I did use the 5 shades to do 3 looks. So again, let's go through the 3 looks. So first up, for look number 1, I start off with the shade Smoke on my outer corner. And then I went in with the shade Crease on my crease and lower lash line. I then went in with the shade Outer Corner all over my lid, which is actually a shimmer shade, even though it's called Outer Corner. And then for my inner corner, I went in with the shade Inner Corner. So that was look number 1. For look number 2, I wanted to do an easier look. I actually only used 2 shades in this look. And I started off with the shade Transition on my outer corner, crease, and lower lash line. And then for my lid and also in the corner, I used the shade Inner Corner. So again, much more lighter look and only 2 shades. But still really liked how that turned out. Then for look number 3, we have a look where I wanted to actually follow the instructions kind of in this palette, because again, they have names kind of with ways of using the shades, I guess. So I decided to use them the way the name is. So for my inner corner, I used the shade Inner Corner, and I also used that on my inner lid. Then for my transition, I used the shade Transition. For my crease, as well as on my lower lash line, I cheated a little bit with that one. I used the shade Crease. For my outer lid, I used Outer Corner. And then to smudge and smoke along my lash line, I used the shade Smoke. And that was day number 3. So those were all of the 3 looks with that palette. And looking at the palette now, it definitely is a little bit more used. This is what it looks like right now. And for this palette, I used the shade Inner Corner 3 times. I used Transition twice. I used Crease twice, Outer Corner twice, and Smoke twice. So everything twice apart from the first shade, which I used 3 times. And that is this palette right here. And again, I'm going to talk you through the rankings next. So for color story, I gave it a 3. I said, is this color story revolutionary? Definitely not. But there is something so subtle and clever about it. This is such a useful, no-brainer color story for me, and because of that, it ranks quite high. Of course, it's not the most creative nor unique, so I could not give it more than a 3, so 3 points there. For versatility, I gave it a 1. Again, there isn't really much versatility here. The looks turned out pretty similar, and the shades are pretty similar, neutral, soft tones, in light to medium depth. So not, again, too much you can do with this one. You can't do too much with it, even if that specific look is stunning. So only 1 for versatility. For quality, I gave it a 5. I said this is a top-notch Natasha Denona formula. The shimmers are some of her best, especially if you like sparkles, and the mattes blend like a dream. I can't fault it, and it's easy to work with, and I can't ask for more of an everyday palette. So 5 for quality. And then for personal ranking, I also gave it a 5. I say I was going to between 4 and 5 here, but ultimately I know I love this palette. These are my type of undertones, and I love the sparkles in the shimmer. It's a no-brainer palette for me and an ultimate travel palette. And that is the first time I've ever said that, because I'm usually not like into pre-made travel palettes. So 5 points there. And adding all of that up, this palette comes in at 14 out of 20 points. So moving on to palette number 3, we have Natasha Denona Mini Gold palette, which is like this. So this one has 5 shades, and actually I pan on all 5 of them. This was in my product level up last year, so I managed to pan on all of the shades. But yeah, let me go through again the looks that I made with this specific palette. So for day 1, I started off with the shade Lodge in my crease, which is the first shade in the palette. I then went in with the shade Dark Sepia on my outer corner, which is right next to it. And lastly, I went in with Dora all over the lid, which is the 3rd shade in the palette. So I used the first 3 shades in the palette, and that was look number 1. To note that for all 3 looks with this palette, I actually used an inner corner highlight. I used actually my eye highlighter as my inner corner highlight, just because there's no inner corner highlight shade in this palette for me specifically. So that was look number 1. For day number 2, I started off with the shade Lodge again in my crease, and then I went in with the shade Bia on my outer corner, which is the green matte in the palette. I then went in with Dora again all over my lid, and that was look number 2. So I used 3 shades in that look as well. So we are quickly moving on to look number 3, and I started off with the shade Bia in my outer corner, crease, and lower lash line, which again is that green matte. And then I went in with shade Anthea all over the lid, which is the green shimmer at the very end of the palette. And then to smudge it out a little bit and make it a little bit smokier along my upper lash line, I used the shade Dark Sepia again. And that was look number 3. So again, I only use 3 looks. I usually try to do a look with all 5 shades in the palette with these type of Natasha Denona palettes, but I didn't do that this time, but I'm still happy with how all 3 looks turned out. So for this palette right here, I was able to reach for every single shade twice, apart from the last shade, Anthea, which I only used once. So that is that one right there. And this palette actually have 1 shade in my Expandos pans. And again, Expandos pans was created by Dora. So that specific shade this month has been Dark Sepia, which I have only used twice so far. So I have 3 more uses to go on that one. And I hoped I would have hit my goal on that, but I didn't quite get there. So that one will roll over to my December, which we already kind of very far into December. I'm actually filming this one on the days going up, so I'm very late. So I'm going to try to use this one at the remaining time this month, but we'll see if I get to it or not. So for this palette, for color story, I gave it a 3. I said for a green lover, this is a great palette, especially for Gunchy greens. The palette has a lovely cohesive color story, and the more neutral tones pair perfectly with the brighter greens, but it's also pretty basic if I'm being frank. So 3 points. For versatility, I gave it a 2. I said, despite being a green leaning palette, you do have some options here. At first glance, it doesn't look too versatile, and it's not unlimited, but you can do some more like neutrally goldy looks, like kind of like my first look, and of course more pure green looks. And it also has a good range of depth, although it lacks lighter shades. So 2 for versatility. For quality, I gave it a 4. I said this palette has a good quality. It's not the best. However, I can't think of too many flaws more than the satin shimmers, so I think it fits around a 4. And then for personal ranking for this one, I gave it a 3. I said I probably would have ranked this palette higher a year ago. However, I am not as in love with greens as I used to be. It is a pretty palette, and I do have some favorite shades in here, but it doesn't make my heart go like it used to. So 3 points there. And that means that this palette comes in at 12 out of 20 points. Alright, so we are getting through the palettes. We're halfway there with the looks. So let's move on to palette number 4. We need to crack on so we can get all of them done in this video. So next up we have the Red Dragon palette from Olen's Eye in collaboration with Judy. This one is a beautiful color story. I really do love it. It has 12 shades. First half is more kind of yellowy, green, neutral undertones. And then we have more kind of peachy, red undertones on the second half of the palette. But yeah, super stunning palette. Let's go through the looks. So for day number 1, I started off with the shade Claw on my outer corner, which is the 3rd shade in the palette, that dark brown on the top row. And then I took the shade Sunrise in my crease, which is the 1st shade in the palette. For my center lid, I went in with shade Luna, which is actually a multi-chrome shade. And then for my inner lid and in the corner, I used the shade Overheat, which is a beautiful kind of shade. It's a little bit deep for me for in the corner, but it's still a beautiful shade. And then on my low lash line, I went in with the shade Amber. So that was look number 1. Then for day number 2, I started off with the shade Jade, which is the green shade in the palette. And I put that in my crease and on my lower lash line. And I did kind of build this shade up quite a bit. I wanted quite a lot of impact with the shade. Then for all of my lid, I went in with the shade Solar Flare, which is the green shimmer in the palette. And then I wanted to do something a bit more unique. So I went in with the shade Dragon as a wing, and I used Duraline to make that into a liquid liner. And that is the red shade in the palette. And lastly, I went in with the shade Overheat again in my inner corner, because that is like the only inner corner shade for me in the palette. So that was look number 2. Then moving on to look number 3, I decided to do more of a red, kind of rusty toned look with a more red and peaches at the bottom. So I started off with the shade Serene on my crease and lower lash line, which is that peachy shade. Then I took the shade Fire on my outer corner, which is that dark kind of burgundy shade. I then went in with the shade Gin on my outer corner, crease, just to deepen it up a little bit and help blend between those two shades. For Aurora, which is that deepest shade on the bottom row, I smudged that along my lower lash line to create a little bit more definition. And then for my center lid, I went in with the shade Amber. And with my inner lid and in the corner, I went in with the shade Overheat again. And that was look number 3. So yeah, very happy with that. That is the looks that I made with this palette. I was able to reach for all of the shades in here at least once, and then I reached for a couple of them more than once. So the shade Overheat, I reached for 3 times. I reached for the shade Amber here twice. And then I think the rest of them, yeah, I reached for once. So for this palette again, we do have some pans, which means that some of these, one of them was in my Expandos pans. And that shade is actually Amber, which I have reached for twice. So unfortunately, again, I haven't been able to reach my goal on that shade. I do again have 3 uses rolling over, and I'm going to try to hit that in December. But for now, I'm still happy that I was able to get some use out of that specific shade. And then when it comes to the ratings for this palette, I started off with Color Story and I gave it a 4. I said this is a fun color story with mixes of neutrals and brighter colorful shades. It also includes a mix of warm peachy shades and green shades. It's honestly such a fun one, and you can get really creative with it. So 4 points. For versatility, I also gave it a 4. I said you can get some real unique looks here. For the 3 looks, I made 3 quite distinctive looks. A more smoky look, a brighter, creative, colorful look, and a warm peachy red look. There's of course nothing cool tones to play with here, but other than that, it's pretty versatile, so 4 points. Then for quality, I also gave it a 4. I said it's a good quality palette. It's not the best Odin's Eye palette that I have, but it still works really nicely. I was able to build depth and blend it out, and the shimmers are very impactful, so 4 points. And then for personal ranking, I gave it a 4. I said I really do like this palette, and in theory, I used to say that this was a palette made for me. However, first, my preferences have changed slightly, and second, is something about it that makes me not reach for it all the time. But apart from that, I really enjoy it, and it was definitely really fun to play with and make the 3 looks. So again, 4 points there. And adding all of that up, this palette comes in at 16 out of 20 points. Alright, so we have 2 more palettes to go. The next one is another Pat McGrath palette. So this here is the Moonlit Seduction palette, which is the Mothership number 10. This is a beautiful color story. I actually got this one from my friend, and I wasn't interested in it at first, but I have really enjoyed it. And let me go through the 3 looks that I made with this specific palette. So for day number 1, I started off with the shade Plum Cabaret on my outer corner. And then I used the shade Rosewood Romantique on my crease and on my lower lash line, both to blend that out and used to give a consistent shade. For my center lid, I used the shade Blitz Venus, and my inner lid, I used the shade Astral Gold Lust. For my inner corner in that look, I went in with the shade Astral Lilac Aura, which is the last shade in the palette, and that was look number 1. For day number 2, I went in with the shade Rosewood Romantic, again on my crease and on my outer corner. So again, it was kind of on my go-to crease shade. I wanted to make a bit more of a subtle look here. Then for my center lid, I went in with the shade Bronze Devotion, and on my inner lid, I went in with the shade Blitz Venus. For my inner corner this time, I went in with the first shade in the palette called Skin Tense Glow, and that was day number 2. Lastly, we have look number 3, and I went in with the shade Extreme Nocturnal, and I put that on my outer corner and on my crease, but I realized it was too cool tone in the end, so I topped it a little bit with Rosewood Romantique, and I kind of blended those 2 as my outer corner and my crease shade, and those blended really nicely, even though they're pretty dark. And then for my lower lash line, I went in with the Rosewood Romantique on its own. And then when it came to my lid, I went in with the shade VR Ecstasy all over the lid, which is a beautiful duochrome shade. And for my inner corner and also in my lid a little bit to brighten it up, I went in with the shade Astral Lilac Aura. And that was day number 3. I actually wore this one to a Christmas party with work. But yeah, really, really happy with that look. So that is it for this palette. I do have most of the shades used as a couple, I think, or one. No, there's only one that I didn't use, which is the shade Platinum Dusk, which is that shade there in the center. So I need to use that in a different look. But otherwise, I reach for every single shade in here. I reach for the shade Rosewood Romantique, which is that one right here. Reach for that one 3 times. And then I reach for the last 2 shades in the palette twice each. But everything else I reach for once. So for the scoring here, I went in with a 4 for color story. I said Pat McGrath is back with another good color story. It's more of an everyday leaning one, but it still has some unique tones and lots to give. Is it 100% perfect? No, but I do really enjoy it. So 4 points. For versatility, I also gave it a 4. I said the looks that I made ended up not too dissimilar, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of versatility here. You can make more peachy leaning looks, plum looks, and cool tone looks, and there's also room for smoky looks, super sparkly and ethereal looks, and of course more subtle everyday looks. Only thing missing really is colorful shades, so 4 points. And then for quality, I gave it a 5. I said, this is such a great quality palette, everything blended like a dream. I was able to put the darkest matte in my crease and blend it into a transition shade, which I mentioned. And the shimmers are so impactful. Very good palette, and I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed my time with it, so 5 points there. For personal ranking, I gave it a 5. I said I really enjoyed playing with this palette. I was on the fence about it at first, as they got so many split reviews when it came out. Some people were very against the non-baked special shades. However, I feel like those shades, although different, still gives a punch. It is a great palette for both everyday and also for date nights and going out. So 5 points there, and that means that this palette comes in at 18 out of 20 points. So the last palette that we have to talk about is my Mountain Trail palette. This is a beautiful green color story from Sydney Grace. It is absolutely stunning, and I really did enjoy this as well. It has more kind of yellow tones, so more grungier greens and things like that. So let's again go through the 3 looks. For day number 1, I started off with the shade Wildlife on my outer corner, and then I took the shade Trailhead, smudged along my lower lash line to like the outer corner, just to get it a bit darker. And then for my crease, I went in with the shade Backwards, which is more of a neutral shade. And then all over the inner 2/3 of my lid, I went in with the shade Escape. And that was look number 1. Really do like this look. Again, for all of these 3 looks, there's no inner corner shades, so I went in with my highlighter there as well for those shades. Then for day number 2, I started off with the shade Dirt Road on my crease and on my lower lash line. And then for my outer corner, I used the shade Rustic. For my lid, I went in with the shade Be My Sunshine, and I went all over, and that created more of a kind of yellow tone look. I wanted to again make something slightly different. So that is a look right there. And then for day number 3, again, I wanted to do something a bit simpler, and I went in with the shade Backwards on my crease and on my outer corner. And then for my lid, I went in with the shade Light My World, and that went all over the lid, and that was that look. Very simple, used 2 shades, but I really like how it turned out. So those were the 3 looks with this palette, and I ended up using every single shade in here once, apart from the shade Backwards, which I used twice. So yeah, that is the uses for this palette. And lastly, let's go through the ranking for this one too. So for color story, I put a 4. I said this is my grungy green color story of my dreams. I remember when I first got this palette during the Christmas in July sale, and I was so excited for it because it was exactly the green color story I was looking for. The only thing I really miss is an inner corner highlight. So 4 there. For versatility, I gave it a 2. I said, yes, you can make different types of look with this palette. There's different undertones to the greens. You can make smoky looks, lighter look, etc. But they are all going to lean green. So there's not really much you can play with when it comes to versatility, so 2 points. For quality though, I gave it a 5, and I said Sydney Grace has such a good, beautiful formula. The mattes always build and blend like a dream, and the shimmers are flattering and impactful. The shimmers do lean more metallic or even silky, and it's not the sparkles that I'm used to, but that is a personal preference and has nothing to do with the quality itself. Then for personal ranking, I gave it a 3. I said I probably would have given this a 4 if it was a year ago, but I'm not as into greens anymore. I do still like this palette, but it's not my favorite that I've played with over the past couple of weeks or months. I do prefer a more sparkly shimmer as well, and right now I am not as into these greens, so 3 points there. And that means that this palette comes in at 14 out of 20 points. So those were actually all of the palettes in my project for this month. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the video. I'm going to introduce you to the new palettes. I usually bring them out, but I haven't prepared that. But it's the last palettes that I have to use this month. I'm hoping to get through all 5 of them. So the first one is my Colourpop Going Coconuts palette. It's a beautiful neutral palette. I might insert some footage while I'm talking about them. Then we have my Pat McGrath Divine Rose 1. This one is more of a mauve tone palette. Again, really, really stunning. A bit more of an everyday palette again. Then we have my Oden's Eye Snow Dreams palette, which is a palette that I haven't reached for at all this year. So I'm very excited to get to use that one. The fourth palette is my Lunar Beauty Eternal Eclipse palette, which is not my favorite color story. So I'm excited to play with this one too, just to get to know it better. It's more of a kind of slow, smokier kind of palette. And then the last palette we have is another mauve tone palette. That is the Viseart Paris Edit palette. And that is the last one that I'm going to try to reach for in the next couple of weeks and do some looks with. So that is going to be it for this update right now. I'm going to wrap it up because I think this video is going to be quite long. I hope you guys are having an amazing day wherever you are. And I will be back tomorrow with another video for Vlogmas. So stay tuned for that. Bye.